Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the only time period more oppressed than a modern group text with your in-laws, Victorian England. Buckle up, because things are about to get foggier than your bathroom mirror after a hot shower, and 10 times more haunted. We're diving straight into the wacky, candlelit world of Victorians and their inexplicable, all-consuming passion for talking to the dead. Yes, that was a thing. So before you tuck your blanket up to your chin, do me a favor, hit like, maybe subscribe, possibly comment, but only if you actually enjoy history that is both boring and unreasonably weird. Let me know, are you listening from a creaky old house? Or in your car, hoping the ghosts stay in the back seat? Now, dim the lights. Turn on your fan for that ghostly white noise. Snuggle in. Ready? Because tonight, we're going to ask the important questions. Why did Victorians want to chat with Aunt Mildred after she kicked the bucket? Was there a dress code for séances? Would you have survived an evening with an aggressive table knocker named Eustace? How did anyone keep a straight face during a parlor game that involved staring at a lemon and pretending it's your grandpa? Would your dead cat have sent you a message through a professional medium, or just knocked over your favorite vase? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1852. You're wearing itchy wool, sipping weak tea, and frankly, everyone around you smells like a haunted wardrobe. Let's see if you can make it to sunrise without accidentally summoning something, or someone, that you weren't expecting. Welcome to early Victorian Britain, where everyone is dead serious, often literally, about what's lurking just beyond the grave. The air's thick with coal smoke and a suspicion that Grandma's spirit just rearranged your teaspoons. Tonight, you're not just another breakfast-averse Brit. You're about to discover exactly why your neighbor has a crush on her Ouija board. It's the 1840s. Picture yourselves winding through gaslit streets, dodging horse-drawn carriages, their wheels squeaking almost as much as the discomfort of society's upper crust at the idea of change. Queen Victoria has just donned the crown, and with her comes an era obsessed with progress. Steam trains, telegraphs, sanitary reforms, but also, paradoxically, a longing for the mysteries of what lies beyond this mortal coil. It's not just fog filling the London air. It's uncertainty, hope, and a vague, ever-present dread that something unseen is peering over your shoulder. Here, table rapping isn't just an impatient dinner guest. It's the sound of the dead breaking through the politely repressed surface of everyday life. You won't find ghost hunting gadgets or thermal cameras, but you will find entire parlors of thoroughly respectable folk sitting, hands linked, brows furrowed, as the gaslight flickers and ancient floorboards protest. Maybe Aunt Matilda is asking the spirits if she'll remarry. Perhaps little Georgie in the corner desperately wants to know if his pet rabbit hopped on to greener afterlives. Everyone's got questions. The dead, it seems, might just have the answers, provided you're brave enough, or bored enough, to ask. How did this all begin? The modern tale of spiritualism's rise can be traced, somewhat embarrassingly, to two young sisters in a modest New York hamlet, Kate and Margaret Fox. In 1848, the pair set the world's nerves on edge with nighttime rappings, claimed to be communications from an invisible house guest. Victorian Britain, already infatuated with séances and mesmeric experiments, seized on the Fox sisters' brand of performative haunting like a child with a new toy. News, fueled by railway and penny press, hopped the Atlantic, and all at once, ghostly communication was en vogue. But why now? Why these whispers, these raps at the chamber door? The answer, as ever, is part desperation, part science, part dinnertime distraction. The Industrial Revolution had upended life. Families were scattered, death felt random, cruel, and often close at hand. Disease swept through cities at a whim. Faith in the old certainties, and in the Anglican Church, was shaking beneath the boots of factory workers and society hostesses alike. Here, spiritualism introduced a hopeful loophole. Death, it said, doesn't get the final word. Of course, not everyone was buying tickets to the afterlife. For every beleaguered housewife eager to chat with her dearly departed, there was a squinting clergyman railing against the devil's new tricks. The scientific set, a motley crew of bearded, cranky men, debated furiously over whether such phenomena belonged in the laboratory or the asylum. But as the century ticked onward and the wars, plagues, and personal tragedies mounted, more and more sober Britons found themselves drawn into dimly lit parlors at midnight, ears tuned for the faintest spectral sound. Meanwhile, Spiritualism wasn't just a quirk of bored aristocrats. The movement rolled across class boundaries, whispering to urban poor and rural recluse alike. It gave women, normally voiceless in public discourse, a new role: the medium, the conduit between this world and the next. Suddenly, the respectable Miss Jenkins could upstage any sermon, simply by fainting softly and muttering in an otherworldly baritone. So, as we settle in for tonight's tale, remember, these pale whispers of Victorian Britain were more than a passing craze. They were a conversation with loss, a negotiation with uncertainty, and above all, a distinctly British way of making peace with the great, uncomfortable unknown. Now, lean in, the séance is about to begin. Step delicately over the antimacassars and into your impossible-to-dust parlor. In here, people don't just sip tea, they desperately try to contact Uncle Charles, who tragically choked on a goose quill. The Victorian parlor is many things, but above all, it is a theatre of domestic performance. Every tasseled pillow and funereal fern competes for attention. Do you see the aspidistra heavy with dust? That's not neglect, it's a sign of respectability. Only the most refined families have the patience to accumulate a layer of honest grime. After all, how else would visitors know you're too consumed by higher pursuits, like fainting, to bother with a feather duster? But this wasn't merely a place to idly arrange yourself into gouty poses. In the parlor, social climbing and supernatural dabbling entwined like the paisley patterns on a slightly worrying sofa. Aunt Tilly may look serene as she embroiders, but she's craning to overhear mention of the Crenshaw estate. Mr. Peabody beside her? He's not reading that penny dreadful for the plot, he's eavesdropping on who's seeing whom, and wishing he could afford a better moustache. The true glory of your parlor, however, is its role as the epicenter of séances and party tricks. You might have a faint hope of balancing a sugar cube on your teaspoon, but you're much more likely to be caught balancing a planchette on your fingertips at a moonlit table. Mediums, and several fraudulent aunts, held court beside aspidistras and wax fruit, conjuring a parade of dearly departed who always insisted on more sherry. Talk of spirits gave new meaning to refreshments, and provided an excellent excuse if someone's ill-tempered poodle started barking at thin air. Parlor games were not merely frivolous amusements, they were social warfare disguised as charades. Every invitation to a round of the minister's cat was a veiled opportunity to outwit Lady Biscombe or, at the very least, sabotage her spelling. If things grew tense, you could always retreat behind a fern, pretending to examine a daguerreotype for signs of ancestral gout. Decor, too, was no passive backdrop. The parlor's crowded mantelpiece, bristling with porcelain dogs and sentimental photographs, stands as mute witness to both family secrets and peculiarly competitive displays of taxidermy. Taste, like spiritualism, was a movable feast. But a true parlor pro knew which aspidistra leaf to dust before vicar's tea or how to angle the antimacassar so the sun never caught the wine stain from last year's unfortunate poetry recital. But what of those whispered tales after dusk, when even the aspidistra seems to bristle with anticipation? It was not uncommon for the gaslights to dim and someone to recall great-grandfather's ghost, who only appeared when the silver was tarnished. The line between polite society and the great beyond became perilously thin, especially after the third glass of sherry. Not that the parlor was all somber reflection and tragic gloom. It provided the ideal canvas for social ambition and gentle scandal. Here, a poorly played sonata could hint at heartbreak, a lingering glance might kindle a courtship, and a toppled scented candle led to a much-needed renovation. If you listen closely, you can still hear the faint echo of spirited laughter, provided it's not Aunt Edith, who refuses to pass on until someone returns her good scissors. And so, whether you come seeking society, solace, or a signal from the beyond, remember, every Victorian parlor is a stage on which the human comedy shines, a place where past and present, life and afterlife, dust and dignity meet for just one more cup of tea. Forget Instagram. Tonight, your new best friend is a professional medium who claims she can channel your childhood hamster. Marvel as she rolls her eyes back, talks in dramatic whispers, and possibly eats all your biscuits. Mediums have been around a lot longer than TikTok stars, and let's face it, paranormal influencer is possibly the world's oldest profession after those other oldest professions. In the Victorian era, people couldn't get enough of séances and table wrapping parties. The only thing more common than men with elaborate mustaches were women in flowing chiffon, clutching crystal balls. Today, The scene has more ring lights and fewer petticoats, but the appeal remains the same. Someone, somewhere, claims they can get you a direct line to the afterlife. No customer support, hold music required. Booking a reading is like scheduling an uninvited Zoom meeting with the dearly departed. You arrive, bearing hopeful questions and possibly a photo or a lock of hair, the creepier, the better. The medium sizes you up, then launches into a performance rich in theatrics and mystery. There's obligatory hand-holding, maybe a little ambient music. If you're lucky, someone will knock over a lamp for extra effect. It doesn't matter if you're hoping to contact Great Aunt Mildred or want closure from your beloved but elusive goldfish, the professional medium has all the answers, or at least, a convincing way of stalling until you do. Let's talk credibility. In an age where even toothpaste has its own influencer, how does one become a verified medium? No blue ticks from the spirit world, sadly. Some mediums go all in. They drape themselves in flowing scarves, light every candle in the house, and invest in the most melodramatic props eBay can supply. Others, aiming for the minimalist approach, simply stare at a blank wall for 10 minutes before announcing your dog's tragic, untimely demise in vivid detail. Imagine if your group chat's vibes reader got a Netflix special. That's the range, and charisma is everything. Of course, every good medium cultivates an aura of tantalizing mystery. Are they genuinely sensitive to the energies that linger unseen, or just very adept at reading your Instagram bio while you're not looking? The best ones turn cold reading into an art form, tossing out statements like "I sense the letter M," or maybe N, and waiting for you to nod enthusiastically. If you look unconvinced, expect some strategic soul-searching. Wait, now I'm getting strong goldfish energy. Next thing you know, you're weeping over an imaginary carp. But mediums don't work alone. Behind every good ghost whisperer is an entourage on both sides of the veil. Living sidekicks handle everything from appointment scheduling to post-session herbal tea. Nothing calms nerves like lukewarm chamomile. Meanwhile, the medium's roster of spectral collaborators, spirit guides, wise ancestors, and the occasional ghostly prankster adds authenticity to the act. Think of it as a paranormal PR team, spinning the story until it strikes just the right balance between comfort and intrigue. The real draw, though, is the sense of spectacle. Mediums are consummate show people, part therapist, part ringmaster, part motivational speaker. They deliver catharsis and closure with all the drama of a star-studded reality show. Some tears, plenty of vague but comforting advice, and the ever-present possibility that tonight, your biscuits might go missing. Ultimately, the medium's true gift may not be speaking to the dead, but offering you a chance to reimagine your own stories. Whether or not you believe in spirits, by the time the session's over, you've laughed, cried, and maybe challenged your own ideas about what's possible. It's the oldest influencer trick in the book: make you feel seen, heard, and just a little bit haunted. Pull up a chair, actually, better grab both hands, because what you're really doing is table turning. The most Victorian way to make your furniture wobble, groan, and tell you that Grandpa strongly disapproves of your mustache. On paper, table turning, or table tipping for the truly avant-garde, sounds like an activity best reserved for moving day or particularly rowdy dinner parties. But Victorian society, always craving sensation and distraction, turned it into the high-octane centerpiece of the drawing room. Imagine dim gaslight, velvet curtains drawn against the suspicious stares of the neighbors, and a cluster of earnest, well-coiffed believers pressing trembling fingertips to a side table, waiting for the unseen to waltz in for the evening. If séances were the overture, table turning was the well-rehearsed dance number. Everybody played a part. Each participant was both audience and performer, their faces stretched in suspense as the table creaked under hands that were, supposedly, utterly innocent. Was it the spirits, or was it Aunt Edith's notoriously dodgy elbow? No one could say for sure, and that was half the fun. The Victorians, not known for subtlety when it came to parlor games, reveled in the drama. Furniture, once resigned to holding up aspidistras and teacups, suddenly became co-stars in the psychic theater. The premise was almost too simple for comfort, which made it irresistible. Everyone gathered around a table, ideally one with 3 legs for maximum potential instability and style points. Cue the suspense. Within moments, sometimes longer if the spirits were, presumably, on break, the table would begin to twitch, rock, or even spin. Gasps ensued. Was it Grandma's weighty jewelry disturbing the spirits? Or Henry behind the ferns with a magnet? No matter, the important thing was that for a moment, the mundane became miraculous, and your living room furniture was in the limelight. From today's vantage point, where the most supernatural event involving furniture is the search for a lost remote, table turning seems both gleefully unhinged and almost huggably earnest. The Victorians approached it with the same mixture of hope, showmanship, and just barely repressed skepticism that greets any good magic show. If the table moved, surely the spirits favored you. If it didn't, someone needed to adjust their aura, or perhaps a round of refreshments. Writers lampooned the craze as the gymnastics of the credulous, and cartoonists filled papers with illustrations of wide-eyed families leaping back from violently animated tables. Yet for every scoffer, there were a dozen breathless converts. Famous believers included poets, professors, and more than one queen. American spiritualist mediums exported the sport across the Atlantic to packed salons and sold-out music halls, where tables really earned their keep as the focus of mass speculation, and, often, mass laughter. In an odd sense, the table was a blank stage where collective imagination and hunger for wonder could play out, its movements reflecting not only the alleged whisperings of the beyond, but also the psychic temperature of the age. Accusations of cheating only turned up the tension, and occasionally resulted in flying furniture. It didn't ruin the secret, it was the secret. Everyone was in on it, at least a little, and everyone wanted to know, would the table approve? So next time your furniture creaks, remember, you're not just dealing with bad carpentry. You might be missing out on a whole social phenomenon, a time when dinner guests pressed palms to polished oak and waited for the world to wobble, hoping the spirits, or at least the table, would rise to the occasion. It's not enough to be haunted, you've got to look good doing it. Tonight's dress code includes starched collars, black crepe, and more uncomfortable boning than the average Victorian dinner party. But why the funereal fanfare? In the 19th century, mourning was essentially a competitive sport, with rules. Picture this, layer upon layer of billowing, doom-colored fabrics, elaborate veils, perfect for dramatic fainting spells, and jewelry made from the hair of your dearly departed. In this world, every accessory is a conversation starter, and that conversation is probably about death. For spiritualists, fashion was more than just a reflection of grief, it was a uniform for otherworldly authority. Mediums often dressed with calculated drama to foster an aura of mysterious credibility. The more you resembled a walking funerary arrangement, the more likely the spirits, who, presumably, appreciated a sense of occasion, were to show up and lend your séance some supernatural gravitas. Let's not gloss over the boning. Corsets were the real ghosts dragging their chains through these gatherings. The extreme rigidity of the bodice, the cinched waists verging on structural engineering feats, it was all about discipline, decorum, and suffering for your supernatural art. By the time a séance reached its climax, someone was as likely to be communing with the spirits as swooning onto the fainting couch from lack of oxygen. It is a testament to the dedication of Victorian fashionistas that rapping at the table might refer as much to ghostly activity as to the gentle thud of one's forehead hitting the wood in a tight-laced swoon. Men, of course, had their own dress code, though it was less about spectacle and more about somber formality. Think black coats, somber ties, and gloves that looked like they'd been stolen off a pallbearer. In séance circles, a dash of facial hair, think occultist chic, did not go amiss. If you looked like you'd just delivered a eulogy, congratulations, you were ready to channel the dead. What's truly remarkable is how séance fashion blurred the lines between solemnity and showmanship. At its heart, it was a performance. The swirling skirts, the strategically placed jet beads glinting in candlelight, the dramatic shroud of a widow's veil, all orchestrated to heighten the mood, distract from any suspicious trickery, and feed the collective imagination. Mediums and their followers were masters of mise-en-scène, wrapping themselves in mystery every bit as tightly as their cloth-bound ankles. You might wonder, did anyone protest? Of course. Certain critics, especially from the medical professions, always a wet blanket at a ghost story party, warned that all this dark-clad pageantry might inflame melancholia or encourage mass hysterics. In response, spiritualists simply added more fringe to their shawls. And what of the spirits themselves? If you believe the accounts, usually written after the lamp oil had run out and the sherry was flowing, apparitions seem to appreciate a well-dressed audience. Perhaps even the dead are partial to a good turnout. While we can't ask them for their opinions on velvet versus crepe, we do know séance fashion had a life, an afterlife, of its own, echoing through costume parties, Halloween aisles, and the occasional runway. Tonight's takeaway: if you're going to invite ghosts for tea, at least give them the courtesy of a little sartorial effort. After all, one never knows when a spectral admirer might comment on your taste in mourning brooches, or perhaps decide to stay for the after-party. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks or adjustments to tone or detail. Why wear diamonds when you can accessorize with auntie's hair woven into a tasteful brooch? Welcome to a world where jewelry is both sentimental and slightly unsettling. The Victorians turned grief into an art form, and, sometimes, a fashion show. When Queen Victoria herself donned black for decades after Prince Albert kicked the bucket, the world followed suit, industrializing grief into etiquette, mementos, and accessories. Enter mourning jewelry, the ultimate limited edition family heirloom, featuring a lock of your dearly departed woven into charmingly gothic adornments. If you ever wanted to wear your grandmother's memory literally on your sleeve, this was your moment. Mourning jewelry has ancient roots. The Romans dabbled in mourning rings centuries before the Victorians took things to Olympic levels. But it was the 19th century that brought a frenzy of innovation, when even professional jewelers specialized in the hairwork arts. Intricate necklaces, bracelets, and rings all housed tiny, braided snippets of hair from loved ones, or, allegedly, the famous and infamous, because nothing spells connection like a stranger's follicle. Some went further, miniature painted portraits encircled by hair, an effect equal parts tender and ever so slightly macabre. Picture a locket, open it up and there's not just a face, but a tuft of actual hair watching you back. Sleep tight. As you might imagine, the jewelry catalogue of the bereaved was expansive. Jet, a shiny black gemstone, was highly prized, rare, somber, and conveniently doom-laden in appearance. But even on a budget, mourning could be worked into decor. Vulcanite, gutta-percha, an early plastic, and black enamel brought the look within reach of the gloomy masses. Go big or go home, said the Victorians, and big sometimes meant enormous brooches shaped like weeping willows, urns, anchors, and sometimes even entire scenic tableaus, each one shimmering with the subtle promise that there was hair hidden in there somewhere. Sentimentality aside, there's an undeniable measure of physiological comfort in mourning jewelry. Psychologists have long argued that keepsakes, locks of hair, an old letter, a favorite brooch, help people process grief. The Victorians just ratcheted up the intimacy, blurring the line between keepsake and creepsake. Sometimes very literally. And this wasn't just limited to close kin. Friends, spouses, icons, all could be commemorated in wearable form. The collection of such pieces became a subculture, spawning not only jewelry but also instructional manuals on hair weaving, the life skills YouTube of its day. Yet, as popular as these adornments were, they also sparked a mild but persistent wave of unease. Not everyone is thrilled by the prospect of wearing a pendant stuffed with Cousin Eliza's scalp. Of course, as time wore on and hair jewelry receded into history, it left behind a complicated legacy. Today, these pieces are prized by collectors and historians, not only for their craftsmanship but for their window into a world obsessed with both sentiment and display. To some, they're poignant, to others, they're the stuff of Gothic horror. Still, one has to admire the sheer commitment. While we might shy away from anything snipped or clipped, the Victorians leaned all the way in, comb in hand. So next time you're about to complain that your smartwatch doesn't quite match your outfit, remember, you could be wearing your ancestors, literally. Mourning jewelry, proving that when it comes to keeping loved ones close, sometimes too close is just close enough. Let me know if you'd like the tone more academic, more humorous, or if you want to add specific historical case studies or anecdotes. You, a friend, and a candle. That's all you need to become a paranormal investigator. Picture it, a creaky old house, wind rattling the window panes, and a pair of intrepid souls convinced that the afterlife is just waiting to slip them a note. But don't imagine sophisticated gadgets or camera crews. Victorian ghost hunters were armed with little more than unsteady nerves, a sense of haunted melodrama, and maybe a notebook to jot down their trembling observations. They operated on pure, candlelit bravado, determined to confront the supernatural even if the only thing they captured was a stubbed toe. Much like any Friday night sleepover today, Victorian ghost hunting blended the thrill of the unknown with a dash of self-inflicted terror. It was a performance as much as it was an investigation. A few shadows flickered across the wall, and suddenly, the entire room was on edge. Chairs were rearranged to form a protective circle, somehow always squeakier in the dead of night, and every whisper of wind through the eaves became the utterance of an unseen visitor. Methods were homespun. Hardcore enthusiasts might invest in a bell jar or set up a trick with flowers sprinkled on the floors, hoping to reveal spectral footprints by sunrise. More creative souls brought along sketchbooks, convinced they could draw spirits into view. There were reports, some wildly imaginative, of misty shapes forming if only one stared into a mirror long enough, a pastime that lent itself to both fright and the occasional case of sleep-deprived vanity. But what truly distinguished these proto-ghost hunters wasn't their equipment or technique, it was their narrative impulse. Every wobble of a candle flame spun into a story. A sudden chill? Surely the breath of a past aunt, come to warn of improperly aired bedrooms. A mysterious knock. The coded message from a suitor gone too soon. These homegrown supernatural pursuits blossomed into family legends, with each generation adding new embellishments. In the absence of photographic evidence, the stories themselves became currency, traded and treasured like rare artifacts at the breakfast table. Of course, not all would-be investigators were of the spine-steel variety. There's a long catalogue of Victorian anecdotes featuring spectral encounters that involved more running away than chasing after. Startled by a draught, or perhaps the family cat, these early ghost hunters often generated more laughter than lingering fear. Even the failures became social glue, the embarrassing details of a shared fright stitched into the wider tapestry of communal memory. Interestingly, the Victorian appetite for homegrown ghost hunting also intersected neatly with the era's broader trends: scientific curiosity, the popularity of detective stories, and a kind of nostalgia for old superstitions. Many pursued the supernatural with equal parts skepticism and longing, towing the line between hard-nosed rationalism and a yearning for enchantment. It was, in its own candlelit way, a precursor to both the DIY ethos of modern fandoms and today's highly produced paranormal television. Ghost hunting wasn't just about the ghosts, it was about the thrill of mystery, the camaraderie of shared adventure, and the enduring hope that, just maybe, the universe still had secrets left to tell. So, as you scroll past another too bright ghost hunting video or laugh at a reality TV jump scare, remember, the real pioneers used nothing but their wits and a drafty house. Their stories prove that sometimes, the search for the supernatural is more about the courage to wander down a dark hallway, whether or not you find anything waiting for you at the end. Tonight's entertainment is a planchette and a board covered in letters. This scene was far from unusual in the Victorian parlor. The Ouija board, that oddity perched between spiritual seriousness and after-dinner novelty, easily took pride of place beside charades and parlor songs. With every shuffle of the planchette, excited guests teetered between two extremes: wary fascination with the great beyond, and the lurking suspicion that Cousin Beatrice was mainly pushing for yes every time someone asked if they were going to be rich. Victorians had a love affair with spiritualism, especially in the latter half of the 19th century. After all, what better way to cement your reputation as an elegant host than by offering guests a chance to interrogate Shakespeare or chat with a disapproving ancestor? The Ouija board promised direct access to the dearly, or not so dearly, departed, no expensive medium required. A couple of candles, a sense of the dramatic, and a shaky index finger were all you needed. There's an undeniable theatrical flair to it. Picture a candlelit room, the heavy drapery drawn against the night, chairs scraping across the rug as guests huddled around the board, fingertips trembling in anticipation. What secrets would emerge from this alphabetic séance tonight? Would Aunt Mildred's unresolved baking tips finally bubble up from the beyond? Would the family cat weigh in on the ongoing sock theft debate? Each participant played their part, gasping at the planchette's erratic movements, turning mundane spelling errors into messages from another world. Naturally, it didn't take long for skepticism, and some fairly robust Victorian sarcasm, to run riot. The media had a heyday. The board, often billed as the wonderful talking board, became as much a punchline as a prop for genuine spiritual inquiry. That's not to say the game didn't have its defenders. Some insisted, in all seriousness, that Ouija sessions had revealed family secrets or even solved crimes. The planchette, they argued, was a true intermediary, though it seemed the spirit's spelling skills often left something to be desired. Critics, on the other hand, gleefully exposed the game for what it often was: an elaborate test of willpower, nerve, and the ability to keep a straight face while spelling out poltergeist with trembling hands and suppressed giggles. The Ouija board also shone a revealing light on human psychology. In the soft glow of the sitting room, everyone's hands on the planchette, it was easy to believe that something supernatural was at work. But, as science would later demonstrate, the movements are all about the ideomotor effect, small, unconscious motions driven by the power of suggestion. The spirits didn't need to intervene when the players did all the work themselves, powered by expectation, groupthink, and perhaps a bit too much sherry. Still, the real appeal was less about ghosts and more about the moment itself: the suspense, the group laughter, the gentle thrill of not knowing which way the pointer would swing next. The Ouija board became the centerpiece of social evenings not because it provided genuine answers, but because it invited everyone present to suspend disbelief just long enough to enjoy a shared spectacle. At its heart, it was Victorian improvisational theatre, with a healthy dose of accidental comedy. So was the Ouija really the world's worst board game? Perhaps in the sense that it provided more new questions than answers, often in wildly misspelled forms. But for Victorians chasing a bit of the uncanny, it delivered a night of chills, chuckles, and the irresistible prospect that Auntie might just be spelling out a recipe from the afterlife. And really, what better excuse for one more cup of tea before bed? Let's talk about the science, that is, people waving thermometers at cold spots and declaring it's definitely Aunt Edna's spirit. Or maybe just poor insulation. Who's to say? It's true, ghost hunters love gadgets. There's always someone in a TV ghost show brandishing an EMF meter, whispering with solemn certainty, "The reading just spiked." What usually gets less screen time is the fact that electromagnetic fields can jump for dozens of unglamorous reasons: wiring behind the wall, a passing cell phone, power lines outside, or yes, your microwave reheating last night's pizza. Still, these devices lend a whiff of objective authority to the proceedings, never mind that they're about as decisive as a weather vane at a wind tunnel expo. Then there's those famously creepy cold spots. It's standard operating procedure in haunted houses. Someone suddenly shivers and the group gasps, convinced that a spirit has just wafted through. In reality, temperature fluctuations are the norm in old, drafty buildings. Broken seals on windows, dodgy insulation, and the fact that heat rises all combine to create genuine pockets of chilly air. The power of suggestion is so strong that, given dim lights and whispers, even a faulty air conditioner can become a poltergeist's calling card. Let's not forget infrasound, one of skeptics' favorite explanations. Infrasound is sound lower than the range of human hearing, often caused by large engines, storms, or natural vibrations in a building. While you can't hear it, you might feel it, like anxiety, pressure, or even a sense of dread. Studies have shown that infrasound can make people report ghostly presences, chills, or strange emotions. So, when Aunt Edna's rocking chair creaks in the night, it might not be her hoping for closure, but just a truck rumbling by 2 streets over. You know the ones: blurry, out of focus, usually taken with a trembling hand in low light, and featuring a vague white blob that's either a spirit or a thumb smudge. Or perhaps it's a dust mote, or, the perennial classic, a camera strap caught in the flash. Our brains are wired for faces and figures. A tuft of vapor can easily turn into the ghost of a Victorian child, if you squint and want it badly enough. Pareidolia, the tendency to see shapes in randomness, is a great party trick for both spirits and wishful ghost hunters. When all else fails, there's always electronic voice phenomena, or EVP. This involves hours of tape where people strain to make sense of static, garage door openers, or radio signals bouncing at odd angles. Science calls this auditory pareidolia, a close cousin to seeing faces in clouds. The more you want to find meaning, the more you'll wring significance out of pure noise. And so, the science of apparitions is less white lab coats and more Scooby-Doo. Ghost hunters parade their gadgets and gadgets lend drama, but the explanations they come up with often tell us more about creaky buildings and wishful thinking than the afterlife. Human brains are great at connecting dots, even if there are no dots to connect. While it's more fun to believe Aunt Edna is rattling the cutlery, sometimes it really is just the pipes, and the power of suggestion doing all the haunting. So, next time the EMF meter wails or you sense a chill, remember, not every mystery is a message from the beyond. Sometimes, it's just science, or at least, science in quotation marks. Smile and don't blink for 16 minutes. Victorian photographers claimed they could capture souls on film, though most spirits look suspiciously like the photographer's assistant in a bedsheet. Picture it. The year is 1861. London's air is thick with fog, and the suspicion that life and death may only be separated by a very thin curtain, probably muslin. Enter the era's latest sensation, spirit photography. As the official story went, the daguerreotype, that magical alchemy of silver, mercury, and mystery, could freeze the invisible. During a time grappling with spiritualism, mourning, and more than a few questionable mediums, the public appetite for proof of an afterlife could hardly be greater. What better evidence than a blurry spectre looming behind Aunt Gertrude as she sits stiffly in her Sunday best? For most Victorian families, séances offered maybe a flickering table and a few ominous raps from the beyond. But spirit photographs carried the promise of something much more tangible, a keepsake from the other side. And no one capitalized on this like William H. Mumler. Mumler, a sometime engraver and all-the-time opportunist, claimed in 1862 to have accidentally captured the ghost of his cousin on a self-portrait. Word spread quickly. Soon, his Boston studio was teeming with the bereaved, hoping to catch a glimpse of lost loved ones lingering in the emulsified shadows. Of course, skeptics abounded. The new technology of photography was, after all, imbued with its own brand of enchantment. Double exposures, retouching, or, more straightforwardly, posing the ghost just out of the main light revealed that the ghostly realm could be conjured with little more than timing and a willingness to risk photographic chemicals in large doses. Nonetheless, photographs of grieving parents with pale, semi-transparent children in ghostly drapery found their way not only into family albums, but into the public imagination. P.T. Barnum, never one to pass up a show, even testified in court that Mumler's ghost pictures were clever fakes, a cause for scandal, and then, predictably, for even more business. Yet behind this curious fad lurked very real human longing. Post-Civil War America was awash in grief and dislocation. Similarly, in Britain, Queen Victoria herself sought solace from mediums after losing Prince Albert. The promise of a photographic encounter with a beloved departed became both a balm and a business proposition. Every accidental blur or trick of the light was scrutinized, published, and debated endlessly in the pages of illustrated magazines. Spirit photography flourished for decades, surviving bad press, lawsuits, and, ultimately, the development of more reliable photographic techniques. In time, as cameras became smaller and exposure times dropped from minutes to seconds, the ghosts began to fade, less the product of mourning, more a victim of consumer technology. Even so, spirit photography didn't fully disappear. The tradition carried on in curious postcards and Halloween novelties, and in contemporary culture, where the ghost in the photo remains a staple of internet mystery and late-night Reddit rabbit holes. For all its trickery and low-budget drama, spirit photography endures as a testament to the ways we interact with technology in search of something more, meaning, connection, or sometimes just a genuinely good fright. The next time you double-check that strange smudge behind you in a selfie or raise your eyebrow at unexplained orbs, remember, you're taking part in a long photographic tradition, stretching back to when a fuzzy outline behind Uncle Archibald was as good as a message from beyond. In that sense, the Victorians may have been onto something. A camera might not truly catch a ghost, but it will always capture our persistent hope that the story isn't quite over, that the next click of the shutter might reveal what's hidden just outside the frame. Tonight, you're invited to the hottest ticket in town, a public séance where even the local vicar might show up, hoping for stock tips from recently departed bankers. Step inside the dusky drawing room, thick with cigar smoke and anticipation. The velvet drapes are drawn against the London fog, and the audience fans itself with program leaflets, hoping both to catch a breeze and a glimpse of the supernatural. Society ladies, earnest spiritualists, skeptical journalists, and an assortment of the flat-out curious, everyone's here for the same tantalizing promise: contact with the other side, live and on stage. The room draws quiet as a self-styled medium, veiled in mysterious scarves, takes center stage. She claims powers that stretch in two directions, talking to the dead and emptying the purses of the living. She surveys her audience with a knowing glance, lingering just long enough to let everyone feel both thrilled and a little uneasy. A drum roll from an unseen musician adds just the right amount of theatrical suspense. This is part performance, part ritual, and all spectacle. Mediums of the day, many with a flair for performance rivaling the West End, delight in the pageantry. Tables may tilt, tambourines rattle without visible cause, and ghostly knocks echo from unseen hands. The audience gasps and leans forward, caught between wide-eyed belief and skeptic's disbelief. Who knows what spirit, generous or mischievous, might drop by tonight? These public séances often blur the boundary between religious service and Saturday night amusement. Advertised in sensational headlines and lamplit posters, they promise everything from tearful reunions to shocking revelations. Some attendees seek comfort for their grief, others, bored by parlor games and sermons, simply crave a fright. There are always the hopeful, widows searching for final goodbyes, businessmen itching for guidance, and the notorious thrill-seekers who attend purely to scoff. A clever medium, meanwhile, knows the value of drama and ambiguity. She'll drop hints so tantalizingly vague that everyone believes the message was meant just for them. When a shadowy hand knocks thrice or a chilly breeze sweeps through the room, the crowd's collective imagination fills in the rest. Paranormal or not, everyone leaves with a story to tell at their next dinner party. Of course, not everyone is convinced. In the flickering candlelight, a handful of skeptics mutter sotto voce about hidden wires, trapdoors, and furniture with a mind of its own. A few renowned gentlemen, notebooks in hand, try to expose each trick, eager to chase the spectres from London's drawing rooms. But even the sharpest skeptics find themselves momentarily spellbound, caught in the communal hush and laughter, the thrill of not knowing. For some, these gatherings are an opportunity, a lucrative one. A famous medium could become a celebrity overnight, raking in applause, testimonials, and considerable sums. These spirited evenings became one of Victorian England's most sought-after diversions, sparking debates in scientific circles and heated arguments in family parlors. Newspaper columns kept score, recording the triumphs and downfalls of mediums in language as breathless as any sporting match. By the night's end, as the candles burn low and the last echoes fade, the crowd disperses into the misty streets, some convinced, some bemused, but all tingling with the aftershocks of the unknown. Whether a heartfelt connection or a grand deception, the séance delivers what the audience craves most: wonder, intrigue, and a fleeting glimpse at a world just out of reach. And so, the hottest show in town ends as it began, with a roomful of mortals, captivated by the eternal question, what truly lies beyond the veil? Not all mediums are equal. It's showbiz, not spiritualism. Let's set the scene. It's a dimly lit parlor in the early 1900s. The air smells like wax and mothballs. A velvet curtain shivers in the draught. Here sits a medium, let's call her Madame Lucinda, wide-eyed and mysterious, hands poised over the table. Spirits are summoned, the lights flicker, thanks to a hidden accomplice, and the audience holds its collective breath. Suddenly, ghostly shapes ooze from the medium's mouth, writhing and glistening in the candlelight. Is it paranormal? Or is it half a yard of cheesecloth soaked in egg whites and stuffed into a secret compartment? Spoiler, it's not the spirits doing the haunting, it's showmanship. The appetite for contact with the departed was never bigger than it was during times of disaster: wars, plagues, pandemics. Grief can cloud reason. Desperate for answers or goodbyes, the living are easy marks. Phony mediums built their empire on that longing, morphing into performers with a knack for cold reading and the occasional sleight of hand. They memorized names, mined the local obituaries, and watched for a twitch in the eyebrow or a sob in the second pew. To a true believer, every trick, no matter how theatrical, became a message from beyond. But not everyone watching was convinced. Enter Harry Houdini, professional escape artist and amateur fraudbuster. Houdini was obsessed with exposing fraudulent mediums, turning debunking into his own brand of spectacle. He attended séances in disguise, slipped fake names into the hat, and then publicly unraveled the tricks: secret trapdoors, stretchy muslin, assistants hired on the sly. Houdini's shows became theater in their own right, the debunker as showman, turning the tables on the fakers. If the cheesecloth gag wasn't enough, some mediums got creative. Tables levitated, spirit voices echoed from the trumpet, hands materialized in the darkness, courtesy of rubber gloves and wires. Photographs appeared with transparent ghosts, clever double exposures before Photoshop was a twinkle in anyone's eye. A few even recruited live actors to play the part of the dearly departed. The formula: a gullible audience, a little prestidigitation, and a willingness to blur the line between entertainment and exploitation. Stories of exposure abounded. The famed ectoplasm produced by medium Helen Duncan was revealed, after analysis, to be nothing but cheesecloth, paper, and egg white. Margaret and Kate Fox, early founders of the spiritualist movement, admitted they produced spirit wrappings by cracking their toe joints, though some die-hard fans refused to believe it. Medium Anna Eva Fay confessed her tricks to magician-mentalist Joseph Rinn, showing how easily even hardened skeptics could be fooled in a darkened room. Yet even as the scams were laid bare, the belief persisted. Why? Because sometimes people don't want the naked truth, they want hope, reassurance, one last message. And where there's longing, there will always be someone ready to sell the illusion. In the end, the story of the phony medium isn't just about trickery. It's about trust, grief, and the human urge to find meaning in the unknown. It's about the blurred boundary between faith and performance, where every séance offers both a stage and an audience hungry for miracles. So whether it's cheesecloth, fancy footwork, or the perfect cold read, remember, for every honest seeker, there's a con artist ready to play the part. And in the dim glow of the séance parlor, it can be hard to tell where the magic ends and the hustle begins. Grieving Victorians kept their loved ones alive by insisting they stuck around to rearrange candlesticks. Mourning wasn't just a phase, it was a lifestyle. Victorian society didn't simply pocket their sorrows and move on. Instead, the rituals of grief were stitched into the very seams of daily existence. After losing a family member, a household might plunge into deep mourning, a social contract spelled out in crepe, jet jewelry, and strict conduct. No laughter, no dancing, and absolutely no cheerful colors. Black wasn't just an outfit, it was a declaration to the world that grief had taken up residence. Even children wore black, their uniforms a visual echo of their parents' sorrow. But the rituals didn't stop at the closet door. Every mirror in the house was draped in black, clocks were stopped at the hour of death, and family portraits might be turned face down, as if to shield the living from the weight of remembrance. Yet the Victorians didn't try to sever the bond with the dead. On the contrary, they nurtured it. Tables were set with an extra chair for the departed, who, it was solemnly hoped, would drop by for a visit, even if just to flicker the gaslights or knock over a chamber pot in the dead of night. Household members told stories, recited poetry, and performed rituals that served to welcome these spectral relatives back into the fold. Far from being an embarrassment, ghostly presences and minor hauntings were signs that love endured beyond the grave. This social embrace of spectral visitors even influenced popular technology. Ordinary portraits were transformed, through clever double exposure or a well-placed smudge, into images where the dearly departed hovered, half-transparent, at the edge of the frame. These photos circulated as cherished, even hopeful, family artifacts. Instead of finality, they promised the bereaved that their losses weren't absolute. The dead were, at least in some vague and smoky way, still cropping up in the background. Mourning, for Victorians, was as much about memory as it was about hope. Hair from the deceased was woven into brooches, watch fobs, or elaborate wreaths, objects to be touched, shown off, and passed down. Letters written in shaky hands were tied up with ribbons, read aloud on anniversaries, and pressed into Bibles and lockets as talismans against forgetfulness. A lock of hair, a faded photograph, or even the lingering scent of a morning perfume became vessels for a grief that never quite faded, stitched into the fabric of everyday life as quietly as a sigh. These physical and emotional rituals made bereavement more than just a sorrowful interval. They created a community of mourners, all united by codes of visible, performative remembrance. From Queen Victoria herself, who famously mourned Prince Albert for the rest of her life, to the seamstresses and shopkeepers of London, Victorians competed in their devotion to the past. To be visited by a ghost, or to preserve a memento, was to acquit oneself properly, loving deeply enough that not even death could silence the conversation. In this way, grief was transformed from private torment to communal tradition. It gave meaning to absence. For Victorians, the dead really were never gone. They lingered in the rearranged candlesticks, the shadow on the stairs, the persistence of ritual, and the ache of memory worn proudly, generation after generation. A haunting, perhaps, but one that made life and loss strangely inseparable. Can't reach a loved one? Write them a letter, then pay someone to deliver it to the afterlife. Postage slightly higher than first class. Death, during the Victorian era, didn't sever communication so much as it changed the address. In a world swept up by both rapid industrial change and unspeakable loss, Victorians invented surprisingly practical ways to bridge the ultimate communication gap. If a telegraph couldn't reach your dearly departed, maybe a well-phrased dispatch delivered via spiritual medium could. How did this work? Imagine the 19th century postal system with an extra stop, the spirit world. Family members would compose earnest, sometimes anguished, letters addressed to someone firmly on the other side. Then, they'd hire a medium, part postman, part paranormal phone booth, who promised to act as a messenger between worlds. Don't expect a stamped envelope, though. The delivery was mostly ceremonial, often performed during a séance, with the medium announcing receipt on behalf of its spectral recipient. Proof of delivery? If Aunt Margaret spelled out a thank you on the table, that was good enough. This ritual wasn't hidden away in darkened parlors, either. During the 1860s and 1870s, dead letter delivery became both a comfort and a mild cultural craze. People would gather to watch mediums read the mail of mourners aloud, sometimes interrupting their own tearful dictations to correct grammar or emphasize a forgotten family secret. The Victorians, it seems, expected even their ghosts to use proper penmanship. Part of the appeal, and occasional absurdity, of this so-called Victorian texting was its blend of modernity and mysticism. Here was a society inventing the penny post, telegraph wires, and a rules-bound postal service, yet at the same time creating new avenues for the messages no earthly postman could deliver. Postage costs were, unsurprisingly, proportional to the spectacle. Some mediums charged by the word, others by the tear. The most entrepreneurial would offer reply service. For an extra fee, they'd interpret a message purportedly sent back from the dead. Typical response, all is well. But these practices spoke to genuine grief, and sometimes, genuine healing. It's easy to chuckle at the image of a bearded man in a frock coat earnestly handing a letter to a medium perched behind a velvet curtain. Yet for parents who had lost a child to scarlet fever, or widows staring down the empty years, the chance to say what remained unsaid could be both ritual and release. As the century wore on, the dead letter trade faded, replaced by new customs, and, eventually, quieter forms of remembrance. But the urge to text the afterlife never quite vanished. Today, people leave voicemails on discontinued phone lines, post messages to memorial pages online, and compose emails to inboxes that will never reply. The ghostly correspondence that began in gaslit parlors lingers in every unsent text and unmailed card. So the next time your message bounces back, or a delivery goes undeliverable, spare a thought for the Victorians, inventors of the original dead letter office, and perhaps, the first to believe that love, and a well-written letter, might outrun even death itself. You've been invited to the Ghost Club. Members, gentlemen, and the occasional rogue apparition. It's no ordinary invitation. This isn't your typical velvet rope club, unless you count velvet curtains hiding psychic séances. Imagine stepping into a Victorian drawing room thick with smoke, whispered secrets, and the faintest trace of ectoplasm on the candlesticks. The Ghost Club's origins are as mysterious as the spirits it seeks to contact, tracing back to the fog-laden streets of 1860s London. Here, parlour chairs creak with anticipation as society's elite, the likes of Charles Dickens and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, convene not to gossip about their neighbours, but to weigh in on the afterlife. At the core of these clubs is an unyielding curiosity. Each meeting unfolds like a séance itself, a ritual of introduction, revelation, and sometimes, admitted disappointment when the only spirits present are decanted from crystal. The agenda, readings, recountings, and that ever-persistent hope of an undeniable apparition. The tone is ever so British, skeptical, polite, tinged with humour. Is asked in a manner blending genuine wonder with cigar-fueled bravado. Yet, being a Ghost Club member is about more than just chasing spectres. For many, it's an exercise in belonging, a refuge for those for whom the world feels a bit too solid, too explainable. The club becomes a sanctuary, its mahogany walls echoing with laughter, gasps, and the occasional frightful silence. Whether you believe or merely want to believe, for a few candlelit hours, you're one of the chosen, tipped off to mysteries unreachable by empirical science. Storytelling is the soul of these gatherings. Members swap tales of haunted castles, midnight knocks, and spectral sightings on lonely moors. But unlike the sensational stories in cheap penny dreadfuls, these accounts are shared with a certain gravitas, with witnesses' eyes narrowing as they recall the chill in the room or the shadow that just wouldn't leave. Each story is scrutinized, dissected, sometimes debunked, but always with respect for the teller. The line between believer and skeptic blurs. Here, everyone is an explorer on the same misty road. Of course, joining a ghost club isn't as simple as showing up with a Ouija board under your arm and an arsenal of ghost jokes. Membership is fiercely guarded, a nod to the club's origins among London's intellectual and social elite. Invitations are delivered with cloak and dagger flair. The secrecy only amplifies the sense of privilege, and, perhaps, the seriousness with which members approach their strange passion. But why do such clubs endure, even thrive, in the age of science and skepticism? The answer lies in their role as cultural pressure valves. Ghost clubs offer a space for playfully bending the rules of reality, where the rational world can be temporarily suspended. Here, belief and disbelief meet for brandy at midnight, and the joy lies as much in the performance as in any actual encounter with the great beyond. Today, the spirit, pun fully intended, of the ghost club lives on, with modern chapters meeting in shadowy bookshops, grand hotels, and even online forums. The rituals may have changed, tarot cards now joining the tea and scones, but the longing remains the same: connection, wonder, and that delicious brush with the unexplained. Whether you're a true believer or just in it for the stories, one thing's for certain: membership means you'll never look at a cold spot in the hallway the same way again. Tonight's special guest, Grandma's Ghost. Your meal is cold, the company is colder, and the conversation is, mostly one way. In the shadowy corners of countless kitchens and candlelit dining rooms, families across cultures have set an extra place at the table, not for the latecomer, but for the dearly departed. There is a peculiar, shared understanding among different civilizations. The dinner table, usually a stage for the living, sometimes becomes a mysterious theater for visitors from the afterlife. In Mexico, during Dia de los Muertos, loyal souls are invited home, their favorite foods spread in anticipation. In Eastern Europe, the empty chair and untouched plate commemorate ancestors, comforting the living with the idea that love crosses the boundaries between worlds. These rituals aren't merely about remembering. They are invitations, calls across the veil. Every clink of cutlery, every softly whispered toast, is another thread sewn into the fabric connecting one world to another. The veil is said to thin during special times, Halloween, Samhain, Qingming, but even on ordinary nights, families find ways to court the company of spirits. Sometimes it's as simple as pouring a little wine onto the earth. Sometimes it's the elaborate choreography of ancestor veneration, with incense, offerings, and silence broken by stories of the dead. But what happens when you do sense a presence? The mind, sharpened by loss and nostalgia, plays tricks. Was that Grandma's perfume? Did the candle flicker in reply to your question? Or was it a draft? Science reaches for logical explanations: memory, coincidence, subconscious longing. Yet around the table, especially when the lights are low and the stories grow more confessional, doubt easily gives way to wonder. The shivery thrill of feeling watched or protected is a comfort, a way of layering meaning onto the rituals of daily life. Food, after all, is memory made edible. The recipes we inherit are edible heirlooms, passed down, battered and stained, from hand to hand. A bite of her apple pie or his holiday stew can deliver a Proustian rush, transporting us across decades in an instant. So when we leave a slice of that pie by the window, or place a steaming bowl on an altar, we're offering more than calories. We're acknowledging an unbroken conversation with those who came before us, and inviting their guidance, approval, or simply their reassuring company. The act is deliberate and tender, blurring the separation between the living and the dead. And thus, the dinner table transforms. It is no longer merely a platform for sustenance or social performance. It becomes a liminal space, both sacred and ordinary, where the living flirt with the mysteries of the afterlife. Some families recount dreams where departed relatives offer recipes for comfort or warnings for the future. Others swear by omens: a cold breeze, a light touch, a sudden craving for an old, forgotten dish, as subtle replies to their culinary invitations. Of course, there's a touch of the absurd here. Imagine explaining to an uninitiated friend why you're ladling soup into thin air or quietly whispering, "Bon appetit, Dad," to an empty seat. The ritual can feel theatrical, even a little ridiculous. And yet, it persists. In the repetition, in the willingness to believe, in that leap of faith, there is solace. For all our technology and rationality, the dinner table rituals with the dead remind us that human connection outruns mortality. So, tonight, as you look at the extra plate glinting in the candlelight, ask yourself, is the company really so cold, or are you surrounded by love that simply refuses to leave the room? The meal may cool, the conversation may lag, but the invitation, to remember, to hope, to commune, remains warm. Let me know if you'd like adjustments or to include specific cultural rituals or stories. Not just for humans. If your pug had a grudge, Victorian mediums promise to interpret the growls from the great beyond. In the golden haze of Victorian séance rooms, amongst the frilled tablecloths and flickering candlelight, the line between the spirit world and the practical world of lost slippers was delightfully, confusingly blurred. Mediums were not content with merely coaxing the dearly departed of the humanoid variety. Why stop at Grandpa, when Tabby might still have urgent business, like requesting a second breakfast, or more fireside privileges? Pet lovers, the same people who knitted sweaters for canaries and wrote sentimental obituaries for goldfish, now found a service perfectly tailored to their grief, anxiety, and, perhaps, guilt. After all, who among us does not wonder, was Polly's love for me sincere, or merely transactional, based on millet seed rations? Victorian newspapers were awash with tales of four-legged reunions in darkened parlors. Lady Harrogate, shaken and shamefaced, burned the offending waterproof garment and, so the story goes, never again heard the unearthly scraping of claws at midnight. Was it guilt? Was it an overactive imagination lubricated by sherry? Or, just maybe, was it the eternal persistence of Beatrice, righting the wrongs of the mortal realm? It was not enough to interpret cryptic raps, mysterious chill winds, or suspiciously familiar barks. For every woof echoed across gee-whiz gasps, mediums were obliged to translate, with confidence, the irrefutable spiritual will of Pet's past. "She says you forgot to fluff her cushion," a medium might pronounce, voice trembling with the gravity of psychic duty. Clients would nod, eyes wide, marveling at the specificity. A specificity that, upon inspection, coincidentally applied to about 80% of Victorian lapdogs. The practice opened endless opportunities for emotional closure, or catharsis, for the bereaved. Was your parrot holding onto a centuries-old family secret? Did the goldfish have opinions about the new wallpaper? Everything was possible in that dim, incense-thick air. Some mediums even maintained regular appointment schedules with particularly verbose animal clients. Tuesdays are for tortoises, one rather enterprising spiritualist was rumored to have said. Evidently, the shell was just a temporary obstacle. Naturally, skeptics had a field day. A certain Mr. Tiddlepot, the fictitious clairvoyant cat of Cork Street, was said to have solved at least a dozen cases of vanished smoked haddock, in reality, misplaced by a distracted butler. Yet, for every eye roll from the rationalists, there was a pocket handkerchief slick with the tears of an owner who received, via medium, one last purr of affection. But the animal spirit craze wasn't just indulgence. It reflected a deep, complex yearning, a refusal to accept the finality of loss. Unlike the aristocrat wishing for assurances of fortune, or the mother seeking word from a faraway son, the pet séance was raw, almost childlike. The departed pet represented not ambition or duty, but comfort and love. Victorians, wrestling daily with mortality, progress, and the anxieties of rapid societal change, looked for magic in the most loyal of places, the animals who shared their hearth. Today, while we might snicker at the thought of consulting a mystic about our hamster's afterlife agenda, the underlying hope remains the same: connection, reassurance, a sense that bonds, however small, survive when everything else passes away. Victorian mediums, perhaps swayed by equal parts commerce and compassion, gave people what they longed for, an answer, however improbable, to the simple, aching question: did my pet love me? Or, at least, did they forgive me for that one regrettable incident with the raincoat? Thus, if you listen closely in the lonely hours, with or without a spirit trumpet, you may still hear the faint, spectral jingle of a collar, reminding us all that unfinished business is not just for the two-legged. Sometimes séances ended with accusations of fraud, people in trances refusing to wake up, or somebody's hair catching fire. Typical Tuesday. While séances promised contact with departed loved ones, more often they delivered chaos, scandal, and the sort of drama usually reserved for soap operas. The dimly lit parlors, flickering candles, and hushed whispers set the perfect stage for an evening teetering between the spiritual and the spectacularly embarrassing. If you've ever fumbled your way through a group project, you can imagine the energy in the room, except instead of forgotten PowerPoint slides, it was wayward spirits, floating furniture, and spectral hands reaching out of nowhere to accidentally knock over Aunt Mildred's sherry. Fraud was a frequent guest at these supernatural shindigs. Occasionally, a spirit medium might be caught red-handed, sometimes literally, as many had taken to slathering their limbs with luminous paint or tying cheesecloth to their knees for instant ectoplasm. One famous case involved a séance in which a floating trumpet soared majestically around the room, until an overeager skeptic grabbed it, yanked off the curtain, and revealed both the trumpet, attached to a telescoping rod, and the startled medium clutching the other end like a magician caught stuffing a rabbit back into the hat. Accusations were never far behind. There are many documented stories of sitters, guests hoping to commune with dearly departed Uncle Norman, ending up hurling accusations instead. Nothing killed the mood of spiritual reverence faster than a finger-pointing match over invisible wires or hastily dropped props. It turns out the only thing more entertaining than a door to the beyond was the spectacle of human folly playing out here on Earth. But even when there was no fraud, séances could go spectacularly wrong. Mediums occasionally fell into trances that lasted hours longer than planned, sometimes refusing to return to consciousness at the end of a session. Awkward. Picture a roomful of anxious Victorians hovering over a catatonic medium, arguing over whether to splash cold water, fetch a doctor, or simply put the kettle on and wait for the spirit world to clock out. No refunds were issued. And let's not forget the hazards of old-fashioned lighting. Open flames and flowing Victorian garments were a volatile cocktail. Candles flickered near sleeves, veils, and the elaborate coiffures of the day, which were often liberally doused with flammable hair tonic, because of course they were. One séance in Manchester made the newspapers not for its messages from beyond, but because Mrs. Sloane's hair caught fire when a candle toppled over. Amid the chaos, someone claimed the ghost of her late husband warned her from the other side about faulty candelabras. Fortunately, she escaped with her sense of humor and a slightly lopsided fringe. Behind all the drama and disaster, there were true believers who desperately wanted these evenings to work. They came seeking comfort, closure, or perhaps just a little excitement. For many, a séance gone wrong wasn't an embarrassment, it was proof that something out of the ordinary had happened, even if it was just Mr. Perkins falling out of his chair when the ghost tripped over his foot. Like all scandals, the supernatural kind offered a combination of fascination and schadenfreude. Séances were rarely boring, and even when spirits failed to appear, human beings could be counted on to provide a spectacle. Whether it was public unmaskings, slapstick mishaps, or the threat of spontaneous combustion, séances proved that the real magic lay in the unpredictability of human nature, a force, as any experienced spiritualist would tell you, far wilder than any ghost. You're reading weekly papers filled with stories of haunted hats and spiritual stock advice, tabloids, but ghostly. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, spiritualist newspapers flourished like mushrooms after a psychic rainstorm. Titles like the Spiritual Telegraph and the Banner of Light weren't just publications, they were portals for readers to keep up with séances, ghostly gossip, and the latest metaphysical marvel. They reported on phantoms as others reported on Parliament, treating table tilting as seriously as City Council. The earnestness of these publications, filtered through Victorian sensibility, lent the supernatural an air of everyday reality. These papers offered more than mere entertainment. For true believers, they were lifelines for hope and comfort. Widows read accounts of mediums offering closure from the other side. Mothers clung to spectral messages from lost sons, soldiers, victims of disease, or simply departed by less explicable means. Unlike mainstream newspapers, with their grim headlines about industrial disasters, spiritualist tabloids promised that everyone could be their own psychic detective. The living and the dead united on the printed page, all mediated by typewriter and trance. Yet, the world of spiritualist newspapers had its very own kind of journalism, one that often blurred the line between spirited reporting and good, old-fashioned fabrication. Anonymous contributors shared tales of miraculous healings, floating trumpets, and séances where the dearly departed dropped by to share stock picks or weather forecasts. Some columns promised step-by-step instructions for developing your own psychic gifts, usually involving equal parts mineral water, musty curtains, and suspension of disbelief. Competing papers gleefully accused each other of fakery. If the Medium's Herald called out the dubious table dancing antics reported by Spirit Life Weekly, you could expect a retaliatory editorial accusing their rivals' ectoplasmic correspondents of inflating circulation numbers, quite literally. Just as today's media outlets battle over scoops, spiritualist journalists sparred over sensational ghost stories, each trying to out-phantom the other. Of course, there was a darker side. Unscrupulous mediums spotted marketing opportunities in every issue. 250-word testimonials gushed about séances where Granny Ethel emerged dripping with ectoplasm, eager to endorse the latest patent medicine, available at all reputable apothecaries. Readers were invited to send in coins for personal readings by mail, and sometimes, the only spirit returned was disappointment. Even so, the appetite for cosmic content was inexhaustible. Between the advertisements for elixirs and columns on automatic writing, some surprisingly thoughtful debates emerged. The very physicality of these newspapers added to their magic. Folded at breakfast tables, exchanged beneath gas lamps, or left in séance waiting rooms, their pages connected vibrant communities across continents. Subscriptions meant you received not only ghost stories but a sense of belonging, a spiritual social network before hashtags or group chats. Looking back, spiritualist newspapers reveal more than outlandish stories. They document a yearning to connect with the unknown, a willingness to believe, or pretend to believe, in magic for just a few moments more. Did the editors and reporters know they were stretching the truth? Sometimes. But in the world of spiritualist news, printing rumors of haunted hats was less about responsible reporting and more about cultivating collective dreams. So, the next time you laugh at a story of supernatural shenanigans in your feed, remember, for those readers of the past, spiritualist papers were not just peddling fake news, they were offering hope in the ectoplasmic edition. And perhaps, in the end, the real story was not about the ghosts haunting the papers, but the living longing for one more message from the other side. The Victorians believed dead relatives could offer comfort, fashion advice, and sometimes even real estate tips from beyond. To a modern mind, this might sound like the ultimate exercise in wishful thinking, or maybe the premise of an avant-garde sitcom. But for many Victorians, communicating with the deceased wasn't an idle pastime or dramatic folly. It was both reassuring and practical, surrounded by elaborate customs and, surprisingly, a sense of earnest utility. Death, after all, was as common a visitor to the Victorian home as the postman. So why not strike up a conversation, if only for a bit of guidance? At its core, Victorian-era spiritualism emerged in response to the era's relentless uncertainty. The Industrial Revolution was turning the world upside down, cities were mushrooming, science and faith daily butted heads, and disease, disaster, and war threatened to snatch loved ones at any moment. Talking to the dead became not just a comfort, but a way to restore some control. If your deceased Aunt Mildred could weigh in on your marriage prospects or help pick out the right cravat, was she not still a fixture of the family? The veil between worlds became, if not exactly thin, then at least dotted with usefully placed windows. The appeal went beyond emotional consolation. Spiritualist mediums were, at heart, counselors, often women, offering the kind of support or advice that could be hard to come by elsewhere. In many cases, a message from beyond could deliver closure where none had previously existed, such as a mother finally learning that her son, lost at sea, was at peace. The bereaved didn't just talk to their relatives, they listened, took notes, and sometimes acted on spooky suggestions. Newspapers of the day printed cheerful anecdotes about spirits approving new wallpaper patterns, or advising widows not to sell the family farm just yet. Of course, not every message from the other side was heartwarming. Some séances revealed unsettling family secrets or stirred up fresh drama. But even these episodes served a purpose, giving voice to the unspoken tensions of tightly buttoned Victorian society. The séance room, with its heavy curtains and flickering candlelight, was a space where taboos could safely be aired, even if the messenger happened to be a disembodied aunt with strong opinions on parlor etiquette. Interestingly, the practice also democratized spiritual authority. No longer did one need a priest or parson to mediate grief or spiritual questions. The departed themselves could be consulted directly, preferably over a rickety card table with a couple of friends and a medium of good repute. This direct access to the afterlife had real social implications, subtly shifting who got to set the agenda in matters of both the heart and the household. For many women, who often presided as mediums or sensitive participants, talking to the dead offered newfound agency, allowing them to guide family decisions in ways Victorian society rarely permitted otherwise. And then there were the little things, a touch of mischief, a flash of humor from beyond. A spirit might comment on Uncle Herbert's new facial hair, or gently remind the living not to be stingy with sugar in the next batch of jam. These quotidian details, however whimsical, reaffirmed the continued presence of loved ones. For people left in the long shadow of loss, it was precisely such ordinary advice that lent the supernatural a comforting air of normalcy. So, was it bonkers? In a world wobbling between faith and reason, tradition and transformation, perhaps not entirely. The Victorians turned to the dead not only for solace, but for practical guidance, social connection, and even a little levity. If you squint past the incense smoke, it starts to look rather reasonable. Faced with uncertainty, who wouldn't want to believe that help might be just a whisper away, even if that whisper carried the faint scent of camphor and mothballs? Along with comfort, Victorians feared that spiritualism invited evil spirits, awkward bathroom breaks, and occasional possessions that upset the dog. Spiritualism, with its creaking floorboards and fluttering candle flames, promised a connection to the afterlife, but it also delivered a fair amount of chaos. Séances, while marketed as solemn occasions for lost loved ones, were often more like barely controlled group projects where nobody did the reading. Sitters would form a circle, clasping sweating hands, and try not to think about whether Great Aunt Hetty was watching them from the great beyond, or just waiting for a punchline. The real danger, Victorians whispered, was that these ghostly gatherings could queue up all sorts of uninvited guests. Mediums might boast that they'd summoned sweet Uncle George or a tragic child lost to consumption, but they just as often reported a rush of curious spirits with dubious intentions. Some spirits were troublemakers, think prank calls, but on a cosmic scale. Doors slammed, clocks stopped, and, occasionally, the family cat got a mysterious case of the jitters. Even the most skeptical participants found themselves hedging their bets. The darkness of Victorian drawing rooms allowed imaginations to run wild. Every scratch at the window could be a loose branch, or a poltergeist with bad timing. With popular fears about the supernatural baked into society, even the faintest evidence of spirit activity could send respectable ladies sprinting for their smelling salts. For devoted spiritualists, the actual logistics of spirit communication posed real-world problems. Séances disrupted daily routines. Candlelit vigils would run long into the night, causing crankiness, missed breakfasts, and sometimes arguments about whose turn it was to hold hands with the clammy, dramatically sighing medium. One can only imagine the confusion of Victorian household staff trying to maintain order, only to find schedules appended because the master insisted a spectral visitor insisted the dinner table needed new cutlery. And then there were the more alarming reports, partial possessions, temporary fugues, and the odd case of sudden barking at lampshades. The press loved these stories. Newspapers ran tales of otherwise sensible businessmen suddenly reciting Shakespeare backwards, or grandmothers waking up speaking fluent French, which no doubt had the local priest furiously blessing everything that didn't move. While many of these stories were exaggerated or outright fabricated, they fed a real sense of anxiety that spiritualism was a slippery slope, leading from innocent curiosity to spiritual bedlam. Religious leaders fanned these concerns, warning that dabbling in spiritualism risked opening doors to demons, that one night's innocent séance might result in years of strange noises and peculiar smells. Popular preachers cautioned against inviting the unknown into your home, painting scenegoers as people liable to let the supernatural redecorate their entire existence, starting with their sense of time and decency. Of course, some dangers were less demonic and more practical. Long séances in close rooms led to lightheadedness and a propensity for fainting. Not all spirits knocking on the table were from beyond the veil. Sometimes it was simply a bored cousin with itchy knuckles. Many spiritualists insisted on strict protocols to ensure no mortal mischief, Yet there were always whispers about sly teenagers sneaking in for a lark, or house cats knocking over planchettes at inopportune moments. Despite all this, the demand for small, candlelit drama never really faded. If anything, the risk of catching a disorderly spirit, or merely disrupting the household schedule, added spice to otherwise routine evenings. For some Victorians, the mere thrill of the unknown was worth a few sleepless nights, a jittery spaniel, and a dinner party tale that would haunt their guests long after the lights went out. Eventually, the Victorians got distracted by newer things, like electricity and less haunted hobbies. Talking to the dead lost its sparkle. In the grand parade of Victorian obsessions, spiritualism spent decades marching at the front, waving its lacy handkerchief at credulous believers and arch skeptics alike. Parlors once packed with gasping sitters, trembling at wraps and floating tables, began to clear out as a fresh carnival of innovation rolled into town. The power of ghosts, it turned out, was no match for the glamorous arrival of the modern world. Wireless telegraphs buzzed with more urgency than a dozen séances. Suddenly, the idea of summoning Aunt Mildred's ghost was less enticing than turning on a lamp with the mere flick of a switch. If you could speak with someone halfway across the world, did you really need to talk to the macabre residents of the afterlife? The decline didn't happen overnight. For years, there remained a stubborn core of mediums, true believers, and those who just liked a good show. But their audiences thinned as the novelty faded and questions of fraud became impossible to ignore. Newspapers, which had once delighted in reporting every possible ghostly incident with earnest dread, started running exposés that gleefully unmasked fraudsters. It was hard to feel poetic about spirit trumpets when you'd seen one stashed under a table, waiting for a less than skeptical crowd. This wasn't just about debunking, though. The very pace of cultural life was quickening. Trains whooshed, cities glowed, and the world shrank every day. Science, medicine, and invention took the starring roles once reserved for mysterious forces and fog-bound graveyards. It was the age of X-rays and psychoanalysis, a time when mysteries looked inward or could be measured and bottled in glass tubes. Mesmerism, mediumship, and magnetic healing were out. Radium, radios, and, eventually, movies were in. It didn't help that the market got saturated. When every other guest at your neighbor's dinner party could produce a wrapping table or a message from Uncle Bob, the thrill just fizzled. Even celebrities of the spirit world, mediums with household names, found themselves replaced by new idols, like showman inventors and daring explorers. Houdini, once a sought-after séance attendee, made a personal mission of busting fraudulent mediums, turning the very tools of spiritualism into props for his dazzling escapes. At some point, the ghosts just couldn't compete. Ordinary life, too, began to offer its own brand of magic. Ordinary magic, yes, but magic nonetheless. Telephones connecting voices, photographs freezing time, electricity chasing shadows from the corners of rooms. Why pay a guinea to hear a faint promise from beyond, when you could see your own voice traced as a wiggly line on a phonograph cylinder, or watch moving pictures flicker on a silver screen? The wonders of the next world suddenly seemed less necessary, and certainly less entertaining, than the wonders of this one. Of course, spiritualism never completely disappeared. It retreated, changed costumes, and re-emerged here and there, especially in times of great uncertainty or grief. But its heyday had passed. The world was moving too quickly for ghosts who only whispered and rapped. The Victorians, ever hungry for the next sensation, were on to something brighter and louder. The lights were on. The ghosts, for now, were out. And so, with little fanfare, no ghostly hand waving farewell or sudden booming voice from the ether, the age of spiritual hysteria faded. The supernatural became an afterthought, a parlor trick, a curiosity tucked away in the scrapbooks of a bygone era. The haunted hush of the Victorian living room gave way to the electric hum of the 20th century. The living had, at last, found better things to do. Want to know if you'll marry rich or be haunted by your mother-in-law? The local seer can tell you. Spoiler, it's probably both. In every village, there's that one cottage with curtains perpetually drawn, a mysterious plume of incense, and a line out front that grows suspiciously longer after tax time, bad dates, or lottery rollovers. That's where you'll find the fortune teller, part therapist, part oracle, part showperson, and, let's admit it, part amateur stand-up comic. Sure, they claim to see the future, but they also see what's right in front of them: your nervous energy, your fidgeting hands, and, on one memorable occasion, the ghost of Mrs. Jenkins asking if anyone's seen her cat. Let's break down how these mystical prediction sessions actually go. You slip through beaded curtains and sit across from someone draped in scarves and more jewelry than a pirate's hoard. With a deep, theatrical sigh, the fortune teller grabs your palm and examines your love line, translation, obvious signs of relationship anxiety, your lifeline, translation, a wild guess based on your shoes and posture, and your health line, translation, do you look like you sleep? You probably don't. Then, before you know it, there's a deck of battered tarot cards on the table and a crystal ball that's seen more fingerprints than the town bakery's pastry case. But it's not all theatre. There's real skill behind the wink and the mystery. They see your half-hidden grin when the cards hint at windfalls. And if there's an uncomfortable shuffling whenever marriage or mothers-in-law are mentioned, you'd better believe that will be addressed. I'm seeing a strong energy in your home. Suddenly, you're recalling last year's family reunion and questioning your life choices. Now, about those apparitions. Every proper fortune teller has at least one story where a presence shows up. Maybe it's the dearly departed Aunt Mildred, warning you about a suspicious casserole dish, or an ancestral spirit nodding ominously when you mention career changes. Sometimes, the spectre offers little more than sighs and cryptic advice about which side of the bed to get out of. Rest assured, if there's a ghost in the room, you'll know, but only after you've paid the full fee, no refunds after spectral sightings. This fortune-telling ritual isn't just a superstitious holdover or a quaint village tradition. It's a communal performance, a catharsis, and occasionally, a dry run for difficult conversations with your own relatives. Seers function as unofficial counselors. They validate your worries about love, money, and fate with a twinkle in their eye and a practiced hand on the tarot deck. If you come in with a burning question, you might leave with an answer, or at least a story intriguing enough to retell at dinner parties for years. There's always a larger-than-life anecdote from the fortune-teller's trade, or the séance that devolved into a heated debate when a ghost claimed to have hidden the town's best recipe for pickled herring. The lines between the plausible and the impossible blur quickly here. Logic is suspended, disbelief is invited in for tea, and everyone leaves lighter, sometimes pocket-wise, always spirit-wise. So, whether you believe in fate, or you think apparitions are just last night's cheese talking, the village seer's predictions are part entertainment, part therapy, all spectacle. Behind the spectacle, though, is the universal hope we all share, to get a peek at what comes next, and, if we're lucky, to do so with a little guidance from both the living and the dearly departed. Grab a seat, cross your palm with silver, and brace yourself. Your future might be stranger, funnier, and slightly more haunted than you ever imagined. Meet the Kardashians of the afterlife, a handful of celebrity mediums who charged by the ghost and managed to feature in more newspapers than Queen Victoria. Picture this: London, 1869. Chandeliers flicker, velvet curtains ripple, and a certain Miss Florence Cook draws a crowd into her parlor. The air thick with anticipation, Florence, a mere teenager, closes her eyes and waits for her spirit guide. She's barely finished tying her hair ribbons before the faithful, and a few hecklers, settle into their chairs, clutching calling cards for lost relatives.
Florence's pièce de résistance?
Materializing the spectral Katie King, who'd conveniently share her shoe size and hair color. Skeptics claimed there was more starch in her bedsheet ghosts than in her story, but the public loved it. Florence became a household name, with fans sending mash notes and critics baying for exposure of the trick, not the medium, much to everyone's relief. Just as today's reality stars are nothing without a rival, Victorian mediums had their share of dueling spirits. Enter the Fox sisters, Maggie, Kate, and Leah, three American imports whose knuckle-cracking séances spread like designer influenza. Legend has it they conjured the Rochester rappings, launching a spiritualist craze so fierce, even table rapping became a national pastime. For a few glorious years, the Foxes packed theaters and parlors, their messages from the great beyond conveniently aligning with audience desires. Need a lost love forgiven, a fortune told, or your Aunt Mildred's will interpreted? The sisters were in touch, for a price. Of course, fame came with receipts, and when Maggie later confessed to trickery by knuckle-popping and floorboard tapping, it was mass spiritual heartbreak. No Victorian A-list would be complete without Daniel Dunglass Home, the ghost whisperer with a touch for levitation, his own. Home floated out windows, summoned musical apparitions, and so enchanted high society that charlatan hunting magicians like Houdini took notes. Home charmed aristocrats and even Tsar Alexander II. He managed never to be caught in fraud, though witnesses swore he had a knack for holding both hands and still shaking the table, a supernatural multitasker, if ever there was one. Behind every headlining séance hovered a scandal or two. William Eglinton, the champagne medium, offered séances so lively they'd have drawn a liquor license inspection. Eglinton's spirit photographs, think daguerreotype Photoshop, featured convenient wisps and suspiciously well-lit ectoplasm. Meanwhile, Eusapia Palladino, Italian diva of the dead, was famed for both her unpredictable spirits and wonder hands. At one demonstration, table legs floated across the room, followed closely by Eusapia's own foot. Newspapers gleefully covered their escapades, debating whether these celebrities communed with the deceased or simply lived off gullibility. Still, for every skeptical headline, another socialite scratched out a guest list for a shadowy midnight séance. And as the medium's popularity rose, so too did the fees. A top-tier reading commanded a night's wages for the working poor or, for the elite, the price of new silk slippers. What did it all mean? Like today's celebrities, Victorian mediums crafted stories people desperately wanted to believe, a world where sorrow might be soothed, mysteries solved, and death, ever so briefly, put on hold. Some knew exactly when to dim the lights and cue the theatrics. Others clung to a shred of faith, or at least plausible deniability. The era's celebrity mediums left an indelible, if slightly smoky, trail through Victorian culture. They courted controversy, graced dinner tables, alive and dead, and transformed spiritualism into the spectacle of the century, a dazzling blend of performance, persuasion, and the perennial hope that someone, somewhere, might really be listening from the other side. The candles are flickering, the table is creaking, and you're desperately trying not to sneeze during the serious part. Welcome to your first séance. Prepare to be unsettled, or at least very bored. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've officially entered the grand tradition of spectral socializing. Victorian séances were less about genuine spiritual enlightenment and more about that delicious combination of hope, skepticism, and, let's be honest, mild discomfort. The room is crowded. Someone's already dropped their handkerchief, and a heavily perfumed aunt insists she absolutely felt something brush her elbow. Spoiler, it's probably the cat. The medium rings a tiny bell and asks everyone to concentrate. In reality, you're mostly opening your sinuses to overpowering beeswax and a mild whiff of fear. You're supposed to join hands, fingers interlaced in a circle of trust, but inevitably, that one cousin presses too hard or someone else's palms are damp with anticipation. Physical discomfort is as much a part of the process as spiritual revelation. There's a moment of silence. The medium's eyes roll skyward. You feel the anticipation in the air, or maybe that's just the lingering scent of boiled turnips from dinner. Someone asks if anyone present would like to communicate. The table groans in response. Is it a spirit, or a perfectly ordinary joint under stress from too many finger sandwiches? Either way, the moment is tense. You'd imagine a séance would be transcendent, but the reality is a blend of nerves, skepticism, and social theater. Someone coughs. Another person stifles a giggle. Your uncle's stomach, tragically, chooses this moment to make itself heard, prompting a debate about whether that's a sign from the other side or a simple digestive protest. If you're the sort who wants to believe, every draft is a spirit sigh, every candle flicker a message from beyond. Maybe you feel a shiver and convince yourself it's Aunt Beatrice, dropping by to comment on your posture. If you're more of a skeptic, you're closely watching the medium's feet under the table, wondering how many toes it takes to make a table tap convincingly. As the séance continues, the tension grows, not because of the supernatural, but because collectively pretending not to be scared is exhausting. Sometimes, something genuinely eerie happens. A sudden chill, a message that seems too relevant, the faintest touch on your shoulder. Maybe that's enough to convert even the staunchest doubter for half a heartbeat. Other times, you'll see the medium surreptitiously wiping ectoplasm, which you'd swear is just mashed potato, or spirits whose answers are indistinguishable from polite small talk. Usually come down to a well-placed string and a room full of willing believers. The séance may last 10 minutes or 2 hours. Either way, after the final prayer and one last appeal for the dearly departed, the circle breaks. The lights return to their regular, stark brightness. You blink, half expecting to see that the wallpaper has changed or that your shoes have swapped feet. Instead, the room is exactly as you found it, minus a little dignity and with far more questions than answers. Maybe you're a convert, ready to attend every session in the calendar. Maybe you're eyeing the medium's cheesecloth reserves and plotting an exposé. Either way, you've shared in the age-old pursuit of mystery and meaning, searching for comfort in what lies beyond. And there you have it. In the grand, foggy parlors of Victorian England, you've survived itchy clothes, long-winded séances, jealous mediums, haunted parlors, and more cheesecloth-based fraud than is strictly necessary. Across the candlelit landscape of the 1800s, you sat with strangers and relatives, sometimes alive, sometimes less so, and tried to make sense of creaking noises, cold drafts, and the occasional talking dog. If you're lucky, you'll make it through the night with nothing more than an unsettling hair brooch and a renewed appreciation for good insulation. So tonight, as you rest on your mattress, free from unwelcome spirits and persistent mediums, give a nod to those Victorians who managed to find meaning, hope, and even some comfort in talking to a room full of ghosts. Because history might be spooky and strange, but it's also a reminder that people have always been wonderfully, stubbornly, hilariously human. Now, close your eyes, breathe deep, and drift gently towards sleep, hopefully with no furniture moving on its own. Good night.